Have you ever asked a question so simple, so innocent, that you never imagined it could destroy everything you thought you knew about your life? I have, and let me tell you, that single moment changed absolutely everything. It was just one question, nothing elaborate, nothing accusatory, just a genuine curiosity that slipped out of my mouth during what I thought was an ordinary family dinner. But the silence that followed, oh God, that silence was deafening. It stretched across the table like a living thing, wrapping around each person present, squeezing the air out of the room until I could barely breathe. I watched as my mother's face drained of color, as my father's fork clattered against his plate, as my sister's eyes widened in what I can only describe as pure terror. In that instant, I knew. I didn't know what exactly, but I knew that something was terribly, devastatingly wrong. For years, I had been living in what I believed was a normal family, with normal problems and normal joys. Sure, we had our quirks, our little oddities that every family has, but nothing that ever made me question the foundation of who we were. Or so I thought. That question, those few simple words that came out of my mouth, became the key that unlocked a door I never even knew existed. Behind that door was a truth so complex, so carefully hidden, that it had taken decades of meticulous planning to keep it buried. And I, in my innocent curiosity, had just blown the whole thing wide open. The weight of that realization hit me like a physical force, and I remember my hands starting to tremble as I looked around the table, searching each familiar face for answers that I suddenly desperately needed. How could I have been so blind? How had I missed all the signs that must have been there all along? My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything else, and I felt this overwhelming sensation of the ground shifting beneath my feet, like everything solid and real was suddenly made of sand, slipping through my fingers no matter how hard I tried to hold on. This is the story of how one question destroyed years of their planning, and how I finally understood why they had done what they did. It's a story about secrets and lies, yes, but it's also about love in its most complicated form, about protection that became imprisonment, and about the moment when truth becomes more important than comfort. I'm sharing this with you today because I need you to understand that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones hiding the biggest truths, and sometimes those truths are hidden not out of malice, but out of a misguided attempt to protect us from pain. But here's what I learned. The pain of discovery is nothing compared to the pain of living a lie, and the freedom that comes with truth, no matter how devastating, is worth every moment of the agony it takes to get there. So settle in, because this is going to be a journey through the darkest corners of family secrets, through the labyrinth of lies that were built with the best intentions, and through the process of rebuilding a sense of self when everything you thought you knew turns out to be carefully constructed fiction. I need to take you back to understand how we got here, back to when I still believed in the fairy tale they had created for me, back to when I was still innocent and unquestioning, trusting in the narrative I had been fed since birth. Growing up, my family always seemed perfect to outsiders, and honestly, to me too. We lived in a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where block parties were a regular occurrence and kids played in the streets until the streetlights came on. My father worked as an architect, a profession that seemed to fit him perfectly with his meticulous nature and attention to detail. He would spend hours at his drafting table, creating blueprints for buildings that would stand for generations. And I used to love watching him work, seeing how he could envision something from nothing and then bring it to life on paper. My mother was a teacher, beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues. She had this warmth about her, this natural ability to make people feel seen and heard, and our home was always filled with the smell of fresh-baked cookies and the sound of laughter. My sister, 3 years older than me, was the golden child, the one who excelled at everything she touched. Sports, academics, music, you name it, she conquered it with an ease that I both admired and envied. And then there was me, the youngest, the one who was always trying to keep up, always seeking approval, always wanting to make everyone proud. We had traditions that we followed religiously. Sunday dinners where we all gathered around the table and shared our weeks. Annual camping trips to the same lake every summer where we would fish and swim and tell stories around the campfire. Holiday celebrations that were elaborate affairs with extended family filling our home with noise and love. Everything seemed so normal, so perfect, so exactly what a family should be. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that were there all along, hidden in plain sight, masked by the beautiful veneer they had so carefully constructed. There were moments, fleeting instances that I dismissed at the time, where something didn't quite add up, like the way my mother would change the subject whenever I asked about her childhood, redirecting the conversation with practiced ease. Or how my father would tense up whenever certain topics came up, his jaw clenching in a way that made the muscles in his face stand out. Or the strange phone calls that would come late at night, the ones that made my parents exchange worried glances before one of them would disappear into their bedroom to take the call in private. I remember once finding a box of old photographs in the attic, pictures of people I didn't recognize. And when I asked my mother about them, she took the box from my hands so quickly, with such urgency, that it startled me. She told me they were just old friends, people from before I was born, nothing important. But her hands were shaking as she said it, and she never put the box back where I had found it. I never saw those photographs again. There were inconsistencies in the stories they told too, little details that didn't quite match up when you paid attention. My father would talk about growing up in Chicago, but sometimes he would mention things about Detroit, and when I pointed out the discrepancy, he would laugh it off, saying his memory wasn't what it used to be. My mother claimed to have grown up as an only child, but I once overheard her on the phone talking about a brother, and when I asked her about it later, she looked at me with such sadness and told me she had lost him when they were young, and that it was too painful to talk about. These moments, these tiny fractures in the narrative, I filed them away in my mind. Not quite forgotten, but not quite examined either. After all, why would I question the people who loved me most in the world? Why would I doubt the foundation of everything I knew to be true? The strange thing about living with secrets is that you start to develop this sixth sense, this intuitive knowing that something is off even when you can't quite put your finger on what it is. I started noticing patterns in my teenage years, subtle behaviors that seemed odd but that I couldn't explain. My parents were protective, more so than my friends' parents, and while I initially attributed this to them being worried about their youngest child, it began to feel excessive as I got older. They needed to know where I was at all times, who I was with, what we were doing. They had rules about sharing personal information, about being careful with strangers, about never posting certain things on social media. At the time, I thought they were just being overly cautious, perhaps a bit paranoid in the way that parents can be in this digital age, but there was an intensity to their concern that went beyond normal parental worry. There was fear in their eyes sometimes, real, genuine fear, and I couldn't understand what they were so afraid of. I wasn't doing anything dangerous or risky. I was a good kid, a responsible kid, the kind who followed the rules and stayed out of trouble. So why did they look at me sometimes like they were terrified of losing me? My sister seemed to understand something I didn't. She moved out as soon as she turned 18, went to college across the country, and while she stayed in touch, there was a distance there that felt intentional. When I would call her and complain about our parents' strict rules, she would get quiet, and then she would say something cryptic like, "Just trust them, they have their reasons," or "You'll understand when you're older." But she never explained what those reasons were, never clarified what I would understand. It was like she was part of some club that I wasn't invited to, privy to information that was being deliberately kept from me. I felt excluded from my own family, and it hurt in a way that I couldn't quite articulate. There were also the visitors who would come occasionally, always announced in advance, always requiring the house to be spotless and everyone to be on their best behavior. They were introduced as old friends or distant relatives, but the conversations would stop when I entered the room, and there would be these long, meaningful looks exchanged between the adults that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. One time, I walked in on my father having an intense conversation with one of these visitors, and they both went silent the moment they saw me. The visitor looked at me with such scrutiny, such careful examination, that it made my skin crawl. Later, when I asked my father what that was about, he brushed it off, said they were just discussing business. But I had seen the papers on his desk, papers that he quickly shuffled away when I came near, and they didn't look like architectural plans or business documents. They looked official, legal, important in a way that made my stomach twist with unease. Have you ever felt like you're living in a house made of glass, where you can see everything but somehow you're still missing what's right in front of you? That's how I felt for years, moving through my life with this vague sense that reality wasn't quite what it appeared to be, but unable to grasp the truth that was dancing just beyond my reach. Everything came to a head on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening in late October. I had come home from college for fall break, eager to spend some time with my family, to sleep in my own bed and eat my mother's cooking and just be home for a while. The autumn air was crisp and cool, and the leaves were at that perfect stage of transformation, painting the neighborhood in shades of gold and crimson and amber. I remember feeling content that evening, happy to be surrounded by the familiar comfort of home. My mother had prepared my favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes. the kind of hearty, warming food that feels like a hug from the inside. My father had taken the evening off from work, which was rare, and my sister had even driven down from the city to join us, which was even rarer. It should have struck me as odd that we were all together like this, that everyone had made such an effort to be present, but I was too caught up in the warmth of the moment to question it. We sat around the dining room table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals over the years, and the conversation flowed easily at first. We talked about my classes, about my sister's new job, about the changing seasons and the upcoming holidays. My mother served the food with her usual care, making sure everyone had enough, asking if anyone needed anything. My father poured wine for the adults, and we toasted to family, to being together, to the blessings we had. It was perfect, almost too perfect, like a scene from a movie about the ideal American family. But then, as we were eating, my mother mentioned something about a childhood memory, some story about learning to ride a bike, and without thinking, I asked a question. It was such an innocent question, such a simple inquiry born out of genuine curiosity. I said, "Mom, was that before or after you moved from Colorado?" And just like that, everything stopped. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. The easy conversation died mid-sentence. Every eye turned to me, and the expressions on their faces, oh God, I will never forget those expressions. My mother had gone pale, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth, frozen in place like she had been turned to stone. My father's face had hardened into a mask I had never seen before, all the warmth draining away to be replaced by something cold and calculating. My sister had her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like panic. And me, I sat there confused, looking around at my family members who suddenly seemed like strangers, wondering what I had said that was so terribly wrong. "What?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended, uncertain in the face of their reactions. What did I say? The silence stretched on, becoming more oppressive with each passing second. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, each tick sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and irregular, pounding against my ribs. I could hear my mother's breath, quick and shallow, like she couldn't quite get enough air. Finally, my father cleared his throat, and I watched as he seemed to make some internal decision, his shoulders straightening as he set down his wine glass with deliberate care. The way my father looked at my mother in that moment, it was like they were having an entire conversation without words, a silent debate about something monumental. I watched them, my confusion mounting, my anxiety spiking with every second that passed. My mother's eyes were pleading, her head making the smallest shake, a barely perceptible no that I almost missed. But my father's expression had become resolved, determined, and he gave the slightest nod before turning his attention back to me. "Your mother never lived in Colorado," he said, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't identify. Tension, maybe, or fear, or resignation. I blinked, completely bewildered. "But I thought," I started, trying to remember where I had gotten that information. "Didn't you tell me that you grew up in Colorado? I remember you talking about the mountains, about skiing as a kid." My mother's hand was trembling as she reached for her water glass, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I never said Colorado, sweetheart. You must be thinking of someone else." But I knew that wasn't true. I had a clear memory of her telling me about growing up near the Rockies, about the altitude making it hard to breathe when she first moved there, about the snow that would pile up so high they couldn't open their front door. I had that memory, vivid and clear, and now she was telling me it never happened. "But you did," I insisted, feeling a strange panic rising in my chest. "I remember you telling me about it when I was a kid. You showed me pictures." The moment those words left my mouth, something shifted in the room. My sister actually let out a small gasp, and my father's hand clenched into a fist on the table. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away from me, unable to hold my gaze. "What is going on?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. "Why are you all acting so weird? It was just a question about where Mom grew up. Why is everyone freaking out?" My father ran his hand over his face, a gesture of exhaustion and stress that I had never seen from him before. He looked older suddenly, worn down, like he was carrying a weight that had finally become too heavy to bear. When he looked at me again, there was such sadness in his eyes that it made my throat tighten. "We need to talk to you about something," he said finally. "Something we should have told you a long time ago, but we didn't. We thought we were protecting you. We thought it was for the best. But maybe we were wrong. Maybe keeping this from you has done more harm than good." My heart was racing now, my mind spinning with possibilities. None of them good. What could be so terrible that they had hidden it from me my entire life? What secret could be so devastating that just asking about where my mother grew up could trigger this kind of reaction? "You're scaring me," I said. And I hated how small my voice sounded, how vulnerable I felt in that moment. My sister reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "It's going to be okay," she said. But her eyes told a different story. She looked worried, uncertain, like she wasn't sure if it was going to be okay at all. My father stood up from the table and I watched as he left the dining room, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. He was gone for a few minutes, minutes that felt like hours, while my mother sat there with tears streaming down her face and my sister held my hand in a grip that was almost painful. When he came back, he was carrying a large folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents, and my stomach dropped at the sight of it. He placed it on the table in front of me, but he didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he sat back down and looked at me with an expression that held so much emotion I couldn't even begin to parse it all. Love, yes, but also regret, guilt, fear, and something that looked almost like grief. "Your mother's name isn't Sarah," he said, and the words didn't make sense at first. I looked at my mother, at the woman I had called Mom my entire life, and she nodded slowly, confirming what my father had just said. "My birth name was Rachel," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Rachel Morrison. I changed it 30 years ago, before you were born, before your sister was born. I had to change it to keep us safe." Safe from what? Safe from whom? The questions were piling up in my mind faster than I could process them. "I don't understand," I said, and I realized my hands were shaking. "Why did you have to change your name? What were you running from?" My father opened the folder and I saw documents inside, official-looking papers with seals and signatures and stamps. "Your mother witnessed something when she was young," he began, his voice careful and measured, like he was choosing each word with extreme precision. "Something terrible that involved very dangerous people. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she saw things that put her life in danger. The government offered her protection through the Witness Protection Program, and she took it because the alternative was death." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with devastating impact. Witness Protection Program, dangerous people, death. These were things from movies and TV shows, not from real life, not from my life. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my mother's story. "When I entered the program," my mother continued, her voice steadier now, like she had made the decision to finally tell the truth and was committed to seeing it through, "I had to leave everything behind. My family, my friends, my entire history. They gave me a new name, a new background, a new life. I moved across the country, to a place I had never been before, and I had to start over completely. That's when I met your father." She looked at my dad with such love, such gratitude, that it made my chest ache. He was assigned as part of my protection detail initially, working with the U.S. Marshal Service. We weren't supposed to fall in love, it wasn't part of the plan, but we did. And when his assignment ended, he left the service, and we built a life together. A life built on a foundation of secrets and lies, but a life nonetheless. I was struggling to breathe, struggling to process what they were telling me. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about my family, it was all constructed, all carefully fabricated to maintain a cover story that would keep my mother safe. "So you lied to me," I said, and I could hear the hurt in my own voice, the betrayal. "My entire life, you've been lying to me about who you are." The anguish on my mother's face was almost unbearable to witness, but I couldn't look away, couldn't soften the accusation in my words because it was true. They had lied. About everything. About who they were, where they came from. Even their names were lies. "We had to," my father said firmly. "You have to understand. The people your mother testified against, they're still out there. Some of them are in prison, yes, but some of them never got caught. And they have long memories and longer reach. If they ever found out where she was, if they ever discovered that she had a family, you would be in danger. You and your sister both. We couldn't risk that. We couldn't risk your safety by telling you the truth." "So you thought lying was better?" I asked, my voice rising with emotion. "You thought keeping me in the dark, making me live in this fantasy world you created, that was the right choice?" My sister spoke up then, her voice calm but sad. "They told me when I turned 18, she said. "That's why I left for college so far away. I needed space to process it all, to figure out who I was, knowing that half of my identity was built on a cover story. It took me years to come to terms with it, to understand why they did what they did. And I get it now. I really do, but it doesn't make it hurt any less. I looked at her, feeling betrayed all over again. You knew? I asked. You've known for years and you never told me? I couldn't, she said, tears in her eyes now too. It wasn't my secret to tell. And honestly, I thought they would tell you when you turned 18 too, but when they didn't, I didn't know what to do. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and I stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the energy that was coursing through my body. I paced across the room, my mind racing, trying to piece together my entire life through this new lens of understanding. All those weird moments, all those inconsistencies, they all made sense now. The protective behavior, the secrecy, the visitors who made everyone tense. It was all part of maintaining this elaborate lie. What about my grandparents? I asked, turning back to face them. The people I thought were my grandparents. Who are they really? My mother wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara across her cheeks. Your father's parents are his real parents, she said. They knew about my situation from the beginning, and they accepted me, protected the secret. But the people we told you were my parents, they were actually friends of ours, people who agreed to play the role for your benefit. My real parents, my biological parents, I haven't seen them since I entered the program. They think I'm dead. The weight of that statement crushed me. She had sacrificed everything, her entire previous life, her family, her identity, all of it gone in order to stay alive. And then she had to live with that loss every single day while pretending to be someone else, while building a new family and never being able to share her real past with them. Have you ever had a moment where your entire understanding of reality shifts, where everything you thought was solid ground turns out to be quicksand? That's where I was standing, metaphorically sinking, trying desperately to find something stable to hold on to. My father pulled out more documents from the folder, and I could see they were official government papers, letters from the U.S. Marshal Service, court documents from a trial that had happened over 3 decades ago. If you want to read through these, you can, he said, pushing them toward me. We want you to understand the full story, to know why we made the choices we made. Your mother was incredibly brave, testifying against these people. She was just 22 years old, working as a paralegal at a law firm, and she stumbled upon evidence of massive corruption and organized crime. When she came forward with what she knew, she became a target. They tried to kill her twice before the trial even started. The only reason she survived was because the government moved her into protective custody. I walked back to the table slowly, sinking into my chair like I had aged a decade in the last hour. I pulled the documents toward me and began reading, and with each page, the reality of what my mother had gone through became more clear, more horrifying. The trial transcripts showed her testifying about money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder. The threat assessments detailed multiple attempts on her life, close calls that could have ended with her death. There were photos too, photos of my mother when she was young. Before she was my mother, when she was Rachel Morrison, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her who made the decision to do the right thing even though it cost her everything. She looked different in those photos, not just because she was younger, but because there was an innocence in her eyes that I had never seen in the woman I knew as my mother. The woman who raised me had always carried a shadow of sadness, a weight that I had never understood until now. The leader of the organization she testified against, my father continued, his voice heavy. He went to prison for life, but his son, he was never caught. He's still out there somewhere, and according to our contacts in the Marshal Service, he's still looking for your mother. Even after all these years, he's still hunting her. That's why we had to be so careful. That's why we could never let you know the truth. Because if you accidentally mentioned something to the wrong person, if you let slip some detail that could lead them to us, it wouldn't just be your mother at risk. It would be all of us. The implications of that were staggering. I had been living my entire life as a potential target without even knowing it. Every friend I made, every person I dated, every place I went, I could have accidentally led these dangerous people right to my family. The responsibility of that knowledge was crushing, and I understood then why they had kept it from me. How could a child, how could even a teenager, carry that kind of burden without it destroying them? We wanted to tell you so many times, my mother said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Every birthday, every milestone, I would think, maybe now, maybe today is the day we tell our baby the truth. But then I would imagine you having to live with this fear, this constant looking over your shoulder, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't steal your innocence like mine was stolen. I wanted you to have a normal childhood, a normal life, even if it meant building it on a foundation of lies. I looked into her eyes, and I saw the truth there, the love and the guilt and the desperate hope that I would understand, that I would forgive them. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to process all of this, to figure out what this means for who I am. The days that followed that dinner were some of the strangest of my life, walking through a world that looked the same but felt completely different. I stayed at my parents' house, unable to bring myself to return to college right away, and I spent hours reading through every document in that folder, piecing together the puzzle of my mother's past and my family's present. I learned about the Witness Protection Program, about how it works, about the careful construction of new identities and the permanent severing of old ties. I learned about the crime organization my mother had helped bring down, about the violence they were capable of, about the long list of people who had crossed them and ended up dead. The more I learned, the more I understood the magnitude of what my mother had done and the sacrifice she had made. She had given up everything she knew, everyone she loved, her entire sense of self, and she had done it because she believed in justice, because she couldn't stand by and let terrible people get away with terrible things. That took a kind of courage I couldn't even fathom. But understanding their reasons didn't immediately heal the hurt of deception. I found myself second-guessing every memory, every story I had been told, wondering what was real and what was fabricated. Did we really take those camping trips? Or were they just opportunities to meet with handlers from the Marshal Service? Were the bedtime stories my mother told me actually from her childhood? Or were they invented on the spot? Was anything about our family genuine? Or was it all just part of an elaborate performance? One afternoon, I found my mother in the kitchen, preparing dinner like she had done thousands of times before, and I just stood in the doorway watching her. She must have sensed my presence because she turned around, and when she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "I know you must hate me," she said, her voice breaking. "I know you must feel like you don't even know who I am anymore." I walked into the kitchen and sat down at the counter, watching as she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't hate you," I said, and it was true. I was angry, confused, hurt, but I didn't hate her. "I'm just trying to understand. Help me understand, Mom. Or Rachel. I don't even know what to call you anymore." She came around the counter and sat next to me, taking my hands in hers. "I'm still your mother," she said firmly. "That's real. My love for you, that's the most real thing in my life. Yes, I changed my name, and yes, I had to leave behind who I was before, but the person I became, the mother I've been to you, that's not fake. That's not a lie. That's me, the truest version of me that I've ever been." Have you ever tried to reconcile two completely different versions of someone you love, holding both truths in your mind at the same time? It's harder than you might think. This mental gymnastics of accepting that someone can be both honest and deceptive, both genuine and constructed. "Tell me about Rachel," I said. "Tell me about who you were before." And she did. For hours, we sat there in that kitchen while she told me about her real childhood, about growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, about her parents who ran a hardware store, about her younger brother who died in a car accident when they were teenagers, about the dream she had of becoming a lawyer before everything changed. She told me about the law firm where she worked, about how she had been cataloging files one day and noticed inconsistencies in some financial records, about how her curiosity had led her to dig deeper, about the moment she realized she was looking at evidence of major criminal activity. "I should have just put the files back," she said, her voice full of regret. "I should have pretended I never saw anything. But I couldn't. These people were stealing millions of dollars, hurting people, destroying lives, and they were getting away with it because they had lawyers and accountants helping them hide their crimes. I thought if I went to the authorities, they would investigate, they would stop them, and I could go back to my normal life. I was so naive." She described how quickly everything spiraled out of control after she went to the FBI, how within days she was in protective custody, how the threats started immediately, how her apartment was broken into and vandalized with a message spray-painted on her wall. "Snitches die." The fear in her voice as she recounted those events was palpable, even after all these years, and I realized that she still carried that trauma with her every single day. "The first attempt on my life came 2 weeks later," she continued, her hands trembling as she spoke. "I was being moved from one safe house to another, and someone had leaked the route we were taking. They ran us off the road, and if it wasn't for the agent who was driving, who managed to keep control of the car and get us out of there, I would have died that day." The second attempt was during the trial. Someone smuggled a gun into the courthouse, and they opened fire in the hallway outside the courtroom. 3 people were injured before they were taken down. That's when the government told me that even after the trial, even after these people were convicted, I would never be safe with my old identity. They told me I had to disappear, completely and permanently, or I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder waiting for a bullet. I tried to imagine being that young, being that afraid, having to make the decision to essentially kill off your old self and become someone new. How did you do it? I asked. How did you just leave everything behind? She smiled sadly. I didn't have a choice. It was either that or die. So I said goodbye to my parents, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. I told them I loved them, that I would be okay, and that they might never see me again. My mother begged me not to do it. She said we could run, we could hide, we could figure something else out. But I knew the reality. These people had resources, connections, money. They would find me eventually unless I had the full protection of the government. So I walked away from my old life, and I became Sarah Bennett. The name sounded foreign now, like it belonged to someone else, even though I had called her by that name my entire life. When I met your father, she continued, a soft smile crossing her face, it was the first time since entering the program that I felt like maybe I could have a real life again. He knew everything about my past, about who I really was, and he loved me anyway. He chose to leave his career, his comfortable life, everything he had worked for, just to be with me. We built this life together, and when we decided to have children, we knew it meant bringing you into this complicated situation. We debated it for years. Was it fair to have kids when we would have to lie to them about such fundamental things? But we wanted a family, and we believed we could keep you safe, so we took that risk. My father joined us in the kitchen then, and I could see that he had been listening from the hallway. He sat down on the other side of me, and I felt surrounded by them, by their love and their secrets and their complicated truths. I need you to understand something, my father said, his voice serious. Everything we did to protect you. Maybe we made the wrong choices. Maybe we should have told you sooner, but it was never about not trusting you. It was about not wanting to burden you with this fear, this danger that you didn't choose. You're our child. Our job is to protect you, even if that protection sometimes means keeping painful truths from you. I wanted to be angry at them, to hold on to my sense of betrayal, but sitting there between them, seeing the genuine anguish on their faces, hearing the full story of what they had endured and sacrificed, I felt my anger beginning to soften into something more complex. They weren't villains who had deceived me for their own benefit. They were people who had made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, trying to navigate a situation that had no good answers. What happens now? I asked. Now that I know, what changes? My mother and father exchanged a look, and I could see the worry there, the fear that knowing the truth might make things more dangerous. Now you have to be more careful, my father said. You can't tell anyone about this. Not your friends, not any romantic partners, no one. You can't post about it on social media. You can't even mention it in a place where someone might overhear. The people looking for your mother, they're patient, and they're thorough. All it would take is one small slip, one tiny piece of information reaching the wrong ears, and they could find us. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. I had spent my whole life not knowing I was living in danger, and now I would spend the rest of it acutely aware of it. And you've been living like this for how long? I asked my mother. 30 years, she said. 30 years of looking over my shoulder, of checking for strange cars on our street, of vetting every new person who comes into our lives. It gets easier with time, the fear becomes more manageable, but it never completely goes away. There are still nights when I lie awake wondering if today will be the day they find us. But then I look at you and your sister, at the beautiful family we've created, and I know it was worth it. Every moment of fear, every sacrifice, it was all worth it to have this life with you. I reached out and hugged her then, feeling her body shake with sobs against mine, and I let myself cry too, for the girl she used to be, for the life she lost, for the fear she had carried alone for so long. My father wrapped his arms around both of us, and we stayed like that for a long time, a family bound together by love and secrets, by truth and deception, by the choices we make and the consequences we live with. Have you ever had to completely reframe your understanding of someone, to see them through a different lens and realize that the person you thought you knew was only part of the picture? That's what I was doing in those moments, rebuilding my image of my mother from the ground up, adding layers of complexity and courage that I had never known were there. Over the following weeks, I had countless conversations with both my parents and my sister, each one revealing more details, more context, more of the truth that had been hidden from me. I learned about the false names they had taught me to use for my grandparents, about the careful stories they had constructed to explain our family history, about the constant vigilance they had maintained to ensure our safety. My sister shared her own experience of learning the truth, the anger and confusion she had felt, the years it took her to process it all and come to terms with it. "I get why you're so angry," she told me during one of our late-night phone calls. I felt the same way. It felt like betrayal, like everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. But eventually I realized that the love was real. The family was real, and that's what matters most. The names might have been fake, the backstories might have been invented, but the bond between us, that's genuine. I struggled with my identity during this time, trying to figure out who I was in light of these revelations. Was I still the same person I had been before that dinner, or had knowing the truth fundamentally changed me? I looked at old photographs of myself and wondered if the happy child in those pictures had somehow been living a lie, even though she didn't know it. I questioned every assumption I had made about my life, my family, my place in the world. It was disorienting and exhausting, this constant internal examination, but it was also necessary. I had to deconstruct everything and build it back up in a way that incorporated this new understanding. I also had to grapple with what this meant for my future. Could I ever have a completely honest relationship with anyone when there was this massive secret I could never share? How could I build a life with someone, maybe get married, have children of my own, all while keeping this enormous truth hidden? My parents had managed it, obviously, but they had found each other in unusual circumstances, both already part of this secret world. For me, it would mean choosing between honesty with a partner and my family's safety, and that wasn't really a choice at all. I started seeing a therapist, someone my father connected me with who had security clearance and experience working with people in witness protection programs. It helped to talk to someone outside the situation, someone who could offer perspective and help me process the complicated emotions I was experiencing. She helped me understand that my anger was valid, that feeling betrayed was a natural response to finding out you've been lied to your entire life. But she also helped me see the situation from my parents' perspective, to understand the impossible position they had been in. "They were trying to give you the gift of a normal childhood," she told me during one session. "They were trying to protect your innocence for as long as possible. Yes, it meant lying to you, but it also meant you got to grow up without fear, without the constant awareness of danger. You got to be a kid, and that's something your mother never had after she entered the program." That reframed things for me, helped me see their deception not as a betrayal, but as a sacrifice they made for my benefit. They carried the burden of fear so I didn't have to. They lived with the stress and the danger so I could live with freedom and security. Gradually, slowly, I began to heal from the shock of discovery. I started to rebuild my relationship with my parents, this time with honesty as its foundation. We could talk about things now that had always been off limits before. I could ask my mother about her real childhood, about her parents who thought she was dead, about the brother she had lost. She could share her real self with me, and that created an intimacy between us that hadn't existed before. Yes, she had lied to me, but now she was giving me the truth, and there was something beautiful in that exchange, something redemptive. I also developed a new appreciation for my father, for the choice he had made to leave his career and build a life with a woman in witness protection. He could have had an easier life, a more straightforward path, but he chose love instead, even when that love came with danger and complications. He had been protecting all of us, maintaining the cover story, being vigilant about security, all while trying to be a normal dad, and I hadn't even known to appreciate that burden he was carrying. My relationship with my sister deepened too. Now that we both knew the truth, we could talk about it, could share our feelings and experiences, could support each other through the process of coming to terms with it all. She had been alone with this knowledge for years, unable to share it with me, and I understood now why she had seemed distant sometimes, why she had moved away. She needed space to become her own person, separate from the lies, and I was beginning to understand that need myself. About 3 months after that revelatory dinner, I sat down with my mother and asked her the question that had been burning in my mind. "Do you regret it? Do you regret testifying, knowing what it cost you?" She was quiet for a long time, thinking about her answer, and I could see the emotions playing across her face as she considered the question. "That's complicated," she said finally. "I regret the pain it caused my parents, the life I lost with them. I regret that they had to bury an empty casket and mourn a daughter who was still alive. I regret that I never got to say goodbye to my friends, that I had to abandon everyone I knew without explanation. But do I regret standing up and telling the truth about what I saw? No. Those people were hurting others, destroying lives, and someone needed to stop them. If I hadn't testified, they would have continued their crimes, and more people would have suffered. So no, I don't regret doing the right thing, even though it cost me everything, because it also gave me everything. It gave me your father. It gave me you and your sister. It gave me this life that I love despite its complications. Her words struck me deeply. This idea that sometimes doing the right thing requires tremendous sacrifice, but that the sacrifice can lead to unexpected blessings. She had lost one life but gained another, and while the price was high, the reward had been worth it. I'm proud of you, I told her, and I meant it. I'm proud that you were brave enough to stand up to those people, that you were strong enough to start over, that you built this life for us even though it meant carrying this burden alone for so long. I'm proud to be your daughter. She cried then, tears of relief and joy, and she held me close, and I felt the final pieces of my anger crumbling away, replaced by understanding and admiration and love. The question that destroyed years of their planning, that simple, innocent query about Colorado, had done more than just reveal a secret. It had forced us all to confront the truth, to deal with the reality of our situation, and ultimately to choose honesty over comfortable deception. In the months that followed, our family grew stronger, bound together not by lies but by truth, by shared understanding of what we had all sacrificed and what we stood to lose. We were more careful now, more aware of security, more vigilant about protecting the secret that kept us safe, but we were also more honest, more open, more real with each other. I returned to college with a new perspective on life, on family, on the choices we make, and their consequences. I was more cautious about what I shared with friends, more aware of the information I put out into the world. But I was also more grateful, more appreciative of the family I had, more understanding of the complexity of love and protection and sacrifice. I still had hard days, days when the weight of keeping this secret felt too heavy, days when I resented the limitations it placed on my life. But I also had good days, days when I marveled at my mother's courage, days when I felt privileged to know the truth, days when I understood that this knowledge, despite its burden, had made me stronger, wiser, more compassionate. I learned that families are complicated, that love sometimes wears the mask of deception, and that truth, while painful, is ultimately more powerful than lies. I learned that we all carry secrets, that we all make choices we hope our loved ones will understand, and that forgiveness is not about excusing the hurt, but about recognizing the humanity in those who hurt us. I learned that my mother's past didn't define her present, that my father's choice to love her despite the complications was an act of profound courage, and that my sister's earlier knowledge of the truth didn't make her a betrayer but rather someone caught in an impossible situation. Most importantly, I learned that asking questions, even simple ones, can change everything, and that sometimes the truths we uncover, while devastating initially, ultimately lead us to deeper understanding and stronger bonds. That one question about Colorado destroyed years of carefully constructed lies, but it also built something new in their place. A family based on honesty, a love based on truth, and a future where we face the danger together rather than letting them face it alone while I remained ignorant. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. If something feels off in your life, if there are inconsistencies that don't quite add up, don't be afraid to ask questions. The truth might be difficult. It might change everything you thought you knew, but it's better to live with painful truth than comfortable lies. Your family might be keeping secrets from you with the best intentions, but you deserve to know who you really are, where you really come from, and what dangers you might be facing. Have you ever felt like there were secrets in your family? Things that weren't quite adding up? Comment below and share your experience. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about truth and deception in a new way, please leave a like. Understanding the complexity of family relationships, the difficult choices parents sometimes make, and the importance of eventually choosing truth over deception. These are lessons that can impact how you navigate your own relationships and your own life. Subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales for more true stories like this one, stories about real people facing extraordinary circumstances, making difficult choices, and finding their way through impossible situations. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change how you see the world. Thank you for listening to my truth, for allowing me to share this deeply personal journey with you, and for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing a family can do is finally stop lying and start living in truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. Remember, We're all just trying to protect the people we love. But sometimes protection needs to make room for honesty, because only through honesty can we truly know and be known by those who matter most.